So I'm Jonathan Stanley. The topic I'd like to discuss with you is whether your practice is hackable. Now, when I was approached with this topic, it was originally a question of, is your website safe? And I think that actually immediately illustrates one of the problems, that we think that security is just a technology question. Security involves people, and if it involves people, then that is where we need to look. We need to look at in the entire picture. So I'm changing the topic, and the topic is your practice hackable? So let's ask the question, does anyone here think that their practice is hackable? Couple? 2, 3? So anyone that did not raise your hand, you are part of the problem. If your practice is on the web, it's hackable. If your practice is not on the web, it's hackable. So let's take a look really quick at why we should care about whether our practice is hackable. So first of all, pretty much every major medical legislation that's out there provides pretty severe criminal and civil penalties if your practice is hacked. Not to mention probably devastating effects to your reputation. So the reason why they're so severe is that a patient that has their information exposed, they might experience stigma, they might be embarrassed about it, but more importantly, they might be discriminated against. They might lose their job over it, and they might have severe financial and health penalties, which we'll go into in a little bit later. Secondly, is you can provide better quality of care when your patients trust that you have a secured practice. If they don't trust you, they're not going to provide full disclosure to you, and that's not going to enable you to provide full quality health care. So it's your own interest to make sure that they trust you. 70% of patients care about medical security. 70%. So if you are doing a better job than your competitor at providing a secure environment, more patients are going to trust you and you're going to get more patients. For me, the most important thing is that privacy furthers the existence of a free society. So for all of us that want to be part of a free society, we ought to participate in that, and the way we can participate in it is by doing it ourselves. So this is the equation. Right now, we're going to go in the past and we're going to see how we dropped the ball. 2003, University of Texas, 59,000 students had their identities stolen. 2006, U.S. Veteran Affairs, major breach. 26.5 million members had their information lost, and it was $20 million they had to pay to settle that. 2007, General Electric, major corporation, 650,000 customer records stolen. 2007, this one was huge, 130 million credit cards, debit cards stolen. That cost them $170 million. That one company had to pay that to repair that damage. In 2011, UCLA Health, Los Angeles, a lot of celebrities, they had their patients, had their records being spied on. Celebrities had their information being spied on, and they had to pay a $865,000 fine for the employees spying on celebrities. 2013, senior management at SRMC was basically put out an all-staff email that provided more detail than necessary on certain patients' information, and just that alone was enough to lead to a major fine, $275,000. Who here could take a $275,000 hit and not feel it? No hands, good. So we're all here for a reason. Every single one of you are hackable. The status quo, right now, 21 million patients at least have had their information exposed. To kind of delve into a little bit more into that, what exactly happens? The fraudsters that are stealing medical information is actually 50 times more valuable to steal medical information than to steal a social security number. They can gain access to medical benefits, drugs that they would otherwise not have access to. They can defraud private insurers and government entities. The victims, they might have their health information contaminated, their credit scores diminished, legal costs, lawyers, premium costs increased, or they can have their insurance dropped. It is a huge problem, and you have to understand how big of a problem it is. Could you imagine going to the hospital and receiving the wrong treatment because someone that maybe was a drug addict stole your identity, got treatment, and that infected your records, and now you receive the wrong treatment because of that? This is costing, in just the US, $80 billion per year, and it's expected to grow. So over the next 10 years, this will be $1 trillion that we're losing to fraud. So there's a whole picture, but I also want to go a little bit into the background so we can have a basis for you to understand how the internet works, and I think that will give you a lot more insight. So computers work a lot like people work. So if I want to talk to a person, I don't need any special tool. I can just go up to them, connect, and I can speak with them. Computers work the same way. You have two computers, they're connected. That is the most basic network. But suppose we want to have a little bit more conversation. If I want to talk to more people, I might need a microphone or some device. So that's when we get our first step, which is a switch. That's the equivalent of a megaphone or something like that. This allows multiple computers to talk together. But suppose we want to get a little bit more computers involved or more people involved. We might want a moderator to help guide the conversation. Computers, we have the same thing. You just have a router. And the router is what pretty much everyone has in their home that connects all the devices at your home. So we all are familiar with that. But once it goes into the internet, that's where a lot of people don't realize that it really just is the same thing. You just get more routers, bigger routers, and they just transmit more data. But the thing that you might not realize, so suppose you're right here and you want to send an email. You shoot an email, it goes through your switch, maybe your router, it goes through another router, all these routers that it's going through, you do not own all of those routers. So when that information that you sent in a plain text email is hitting each of these routers that you do not own, someone can pick up that information and steal it. Who is aware of that? Pretty good show of hands, good. So, not only that, when you send an email from your device, typically that's cloned to your cell phone, your tablet, your home computer, your work computer, it's backed up to the cloud, it's backed up to a tape drive or whatever it is. 6 different things it can be backed up to in plain text. That can be 6 new places that a fraudster could pick on to grab that information. Then it goes to the other end, it goes to the recipient's machine. Same thing, cell phone, tablet, computer, work computer, copies of data everywhere. So we have 12 places now, plus all of the routers in queue. So when you send a plain text email across the web, you have a huge, huge risk. It's the digital equivalent of a postcard. By the way, there's a few companies offering secure email. That's pretty much non-existent, so just don't buy it. So, actually, let me back up a little bit here. So again, we've dropped the ball as an industry, and it's time for us to improve here. So I want to go back to the myth. Security is a job for IT geeks. That's true to a certain extent, but really it's every single person's responsibility. It's a team effort, and you're only as good as your weakest link. And everyone understands this analogy, right? You have the one link that breaks, and that breaks the chain, you lose your anchor, your ship sails away. Well, our security actually is not even that good. When I worked with, dozens of practices, typically this is the kind of security I see. An absolute absence of security, and then a ridiculous level of security in some specific area. This is not going to do anyone any good. We need a better job, so we're going to go back to some basics. Way we're going to do that is I want to start with some trivia. So, Mr. X lives in zip code 02138. He's born July 31st, 1935. Now, Ty was talking about, I don't know where he went, but how you might want to anonymize data and maybe share that information to help collaborate with your competitors or business partners. So who thinks that's anonymous? You can be honest about it. Anyone think it's anonymous? Well, you know it's not going to be anonymous. So that is William Weld, governor of Massachusetts. The insurance company that basically manages all of Massachusetts believed that was anonymous information, sold that information to industry, and a computer science professor cross-referenced it with the census data and realized that 87% of people are identifiable by those 3 little bits of information. So, we need more entropy. And entropy is a word that we really just need to know for this presentation. But entropy basically means a lack of predictability. So when we have more entropy, it's more chaotic. We can't figure it out. When you have less entropy, it's more simple. We can pretty much understand what's going to happen. So let's apply this to our passwords. Which password is more secure? Pretty much everyone in this room has been trained to believe that probably a washing machine is the more secure password because it has weird characters in there. Cheese Flight Magical Zebra. Who thinks that's more secure? That's actually you've taken my course. So washing machine, even with those switched out characters, has an entropy of 26.8 bits. You probably can't read that, but that can be cracked in about 3 hours. That is a very weak password. Cheese Flight Magical Zebra, 39.4 bits of entropy, that would take 3 years to crack. There is no reason that we need to have such weak passwords when we're protecting information. 91% of all passwords can be 91% of passwords are in the top 1,000, and in the top 10,000 passwords represents 99.8% of all passwords. Here's what's worse. This is the top 500 passwords. I just revealed several of your passwords right now in this image. And it's some of them can be obscene, so we're just going to keep going. But we need to have a better system for figuring out our passwords. So I've decided to use Edward Snowden as a good example since he's been in the news recently. And you can take pretty much any sentence that you can remember in your head. And you can take a news headline, maybe something from your favorite book, maybe something from a magazine, any sentence that you can remember, something not popular though, maybe not the Declaration of Independence is a bad choice, things that are very common like your national slogan or anything like that. Choose something a little bit odd, but something that you can remember. Just take the first letter of each one, E, S, R, you can continue it on, and you have a very complex password, even though in your mind you can just remember Edward Snowden revealed US black budgets $52.6 billion in secret spy programs. Next, you've seen a lot that in every single website that you visit, you should never have the same password. So in the middle, maybe we go to, if we're on Facebook, we add Facebook. If we go on Twitter, we might add Twitter. Something simple in the middle to give an indicator of that website, and it's just in a random, as far as if you were looking at that without knowing your password, you would have no idea that that means Facebook there. So now you have a unique password for every single website. You have an easy way to remember it. And now you have a password that would take centuries to crack. Every single one of you can do this. It's free. So how do we apply it to our practice as a whole? I'd ask you to embrace a Leo principle. And basically this means you should limit, encrypt, and obfuscate. I'll go into what I mean by that. So first, the most obvious, limit. If you don't have it, they can't steal it. If your wallet's empty, there's nothing to take. So that's, in English, who, what, when, where, why. Why are we asking for certain information? What information are we asking for? I don't know how many times I've seen a standard contact form that typically asks for email address and question. With a doctor's website, it might be address, date of birth, zip code, all this information. What you're doing is you're exposing yourself and your patient to risk. There's no reason for you to do it. You should limit the amount of information you're collecting if you can. Next is encryption. So there's different qualities of encryption. There's, kind of look at this antique key here. That's pretty poor encryption, can be picked pretty easily. Newer keys are much more complex, therefore much more difficult to break into. So whenever you're looking at encryption, you want to have the more complex versions if you can. And encryption is basically just this, you get some text and it converts to something really unintelligible by anyone that doesn't have the key. If someone does have the key, they could translate that text into, if you're storing it, you should be encrypting it. Remember that. If you're storing it, you should be encrypting it. On my machine, I have a Mac. I enable File Vault. Anywhere I travel, I would not travel without File Vault enabled. If my laptop is stolen, there is zero information that can be taken from me because everything on my machine is encrypted. If anyone were to grab it, they can maybe use it. I'd have to go and buy a new one, but I won't lose any information. This is different than password protection. Most of us have a password when we enter on our machine. That doesn't mean that it's encrypted. Password protection is the equivalent of a locked front door and an open back door. You can get in just as well through the back door and get access to the data as it were without encryption. So you need to have encryption. If you're on a Windows machine, there's a great program called TrueCrypt. It is free, and you can encrypt pretty much any information that you might want, including the entire drive. Last is pretty obvious, which is obfuscate, which is you don't put your safe in the front yard and dare criminals to break in. You need to hide your information. You need to make it obfuscated. This could be things like sending files called credit card numbers.xls, things like this. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I see it all the time. A fax machine on the front desk where patients can access it. Or in your front lobby, you're asking for patients' personal information that other patients around can hear. You need to not do that. So you can change maybe the way that you ask, maybe make it written, or ask for other identifiers that might not be as revealing as social security numbers and things like that. So those are the Leo principles: limit, encrypt, obfuscate. Now, we want to talk about online and offline, right? So when we're talking about security, we're not just talking about computers, but we are. We're talking about laptops, desktops, servers, smartphones, dumb phones, PDAs, CDs, DVDs, thumb drives, hard drives, receipts, invoices, notepads, trash, phones, fax, internet, Wi-Fi, everything. Every single thing that you have must follow these principles, because if you don't, that's your weak point. Now that's your weakest link, you're going to get hacked that way. So we'll start with online. 2 really quick tips. All of your web forms that you're communicating, your patients are communicating to you from, those need to be encrypted with SSL. It's very simple to do. It's costly to do sometimes, but basically if you do it, it's no burden on the patient and you can do it fairly easily, and that encrypts the transmission of the information from the patient's computer to your computer. That does not necessarily mean that the storage is encrypted. You need to encrypt that too. But this way, all those routers that we saw cannot intercept your information. Secondly, as we talked about email, never volunteer PHI over email. All right, offline. So again, we have to think about human behavior. If you ever have something that's too difficult for you to implement without a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, it's not going to work and you're going to stop doing it. So you need to think about things like, are we putting passwords on sticky notes and sticking it on the computer monitor to where anyone that walks up to it could grab the password and break in? Are we writing down patient information when they're calling us on the phone on a notepad and then translating it to our computer system? All these behaviors, now you have a sticky note that you put in the trash, that goes in the trash, someone picks your trash, they're going to steal the information. So you get information over the phone. Are you asking for private health information over the phone where someone could hear you, maybe someone could hear the patient? Both of those give you an opportunity to be hacked. You should not do that. So, when you follow the Leo principles, online and offline, you can be as comfortable as this line, right? But actually, you don't want to be that comfortable, because the second that you're not paying attention to security, that's when you become a victim. So I want to challenge you. First of all, before you leave Germany, I put 1 week, but I think before you leave Germany, as you're on your flight home, as you're leaving the hotel, every single one of you can change your passwords and make a secure password. That's easy, it's free. Secondly, the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, it's a wonderful organization. They have this link here, and by the way, anyone that wants to link to this presentation, it's on the web, and I'm happy to give it to you. But that article on Electronic Frontiers is a great article, and it will give you a lot of details about maybe if you want to know more about traveling with private information, or how it works on a cell phone, and very specific details on certain questions you might have. But I also want to give us a common sense check. So just because I'm telling you how important security is doesn't mean that we need to go back to that ridiculous gate in the front of our yard that's useless. We need to have common sense restrictions on what we're talking about. So if a patient wants to communicate with you via Facebook or Twitter, I'm not saying do not communicate to the patients through other methods. Even though those might not be secure, we already talked about the weakest link is the weakest link. So if the patient's the weakest link, there's really nothing you can do about it. If they go around talking about that they had an IVF procedure, that's their right to do. So if they want to communicate with you that way, you're welcome to accommodate that and still provide the same level of service that you've always been providing. You just need to be aware that if you're volunteering that information, now you're the one that's violating it. The patient should be the one that chooses. And again, keeping it simple. If you lock your door on the way out, you cut out 90% of your crime. Same thing with your practice. If you can make it simple to where it's just as simple as switching a key on your way out, that's going to work, and that's going to do a lot better for you. So when you're approaching security answers, if the answer comes back and it looks really complex and you don't understand it and you don't think that it's going to actually follow through with it, you need to keep hunting. You need to keep demanding a better level of security. And just a quick summary, if you did want to take, I know a lot of people are taking pictures, so this is the one to take pictures of. This is kind of your punch list of things to do. Ask questions until you understand it. If you can teach the topic, you understand it well enough to protect your practice. So every single one of you can become an advocate for your practice and have every single person in your staff review this presentation, review the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, and you will become a much better practice. And again, it's the weakest link, so you need to be the one pushing this out to your practice and making sure they care about it.